This is my 2010 Toyota Venza. I recently had to change the alternator and there really wasn't very much information online how to do so I decided to make a video. Now, changing the alternator itself is really not that complicated. The problem I was having was getting the alternator out of the engine bay after everything was disconnected. There just wasn't enough clearance. Now, several people have had problems getting the alternator out of these Toyotas, and the problem for them ends up coming back to a hidden bracket behind or under the alternator. That was not my problem. I didn't have that bracket, or maybe if somebody else had already changed the alternator in the past, maybe they just didn't reconnect that bracket. I don't know the situation, but that was not my problem. I just couldn't get it out of the engine bay. But if that bracket is the problem that you're having, I think there's other YouTube videos that show a Toyota Camry alternator being removed, and that bracket is the culprit on that case. So after a week of taking things off the car that didn't need to be taken off and researching online and a lot of frustration, I finally figured out how to get the alternator out of the engine bay, and this is how I did it. So I started by removing the passenger side tire. Yes, to remove the alternator, you have to remove the passenger side tire. This is to gain access to the tension pulley, which is on the side of the engine. Now, I believe there's also other YouTube videos that show how to remove the belt on Toyota Venza, so you can check that out. Really, all I did was I used I believe a 14 millimeter socket on a wrench, and I put that on the tension pulley and relieve the tension from the serpentine belt. There's a little hole in the middle of the tension pulley. I just put a nail in there, and that held the pulley in place while I removed the serpentine belt from the alternator. Next, I removed all the electrical wires and cables that are attached to the alternator, followed by 2 bolts, one at the top and one at the bottom, that hold the alternator in place. And that's when I ran into my problem. As you can see, there's not enough clearance between the engine block and the frame of the vehicle to actually remove the alternator from the engine bay. What I thought to do as a last resort turned out to be what I should have done the entire time, and it turned out to be very simple at that. It turned out the solution was to remove the dual cooling fans. I thought the cooling fans had a shroud that wrapped around the radiator or something like that, and I figured it was going to be a huge hassle to remove the radiator, the fans, and disconnect everything. Turns out I was wrong. It was actually quite simple. I started by removing the plastic cover that wraps around the front edge of the engine bay. Next, I removed the air intake vent, followed by the driver's side upper radiator hose. Now, coolant will spill everywhere whenever you disconnect this, so make sure you have a bucket or something so you don't make a mess, and try to be mindful of the electrical cables. Now that brings us to our next step. Disconnect any electrical wires that are connected to any part of the fans. Now, the fan assembly should only be held in place by a couple of these clips. I think there's about 3. So just use some pliers, give them a squeeze at the end, and the fan assembly should pop out and slide out of the engine bay pretty easily. Now here's a look of the engine bay with the fan assembly taken out, and also the alternator has been easily removed at that point. You can see there's really a ton of room in there now, well, seemingly, and if I would have just done this from the beginning, it would have saved me probably about a week of work. I could have got this all done in one day. So that's why I wanted to make this video, so you can learn from my mistakes. And as you look through the engine bay, you can probably see other things disassembled that I never told you to take off. That's because I was taking whatever I could off to try to figure out how to get that alternator out. If I just would have done this, easy peasy. So that was how I did it. To reinstall the alternator, just reverse the process, make sure you got all your connections and everything tight so you don't have any problems, and make sure you check your serpentine belt. This is a great time to replace it if there's any visible wear and tear on it, and that can help to avoid a major headache in the future. So I hope this video was something of a help to you guys. Anybody out there that was trying to figure out how to get their alternator out of the engine bay, I didn't have the benefit of anybody making a video at that point. So if this video was a help to you, please leave a like, feel free to subscribe. If you want to, feel free to browse the channel. I have a variety of different videos that might interest you, so check them out, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks.